Welcome to the Modern Law Revolution podcast, sponsored by the Colorado Bar Association. This is the podcast that features the successful and happy lawyers in Colorado who are revolutionizing the practice of law. And today we have a special guest all the way from Chicago. So beyond the borders of Colorado, we're spreading this far and wide. My name is JP Box. I'm your co-host. I'm a lawyer turned entrepreneur, consultant, and author, and the immediate past chair of the CBA's Modern Law Practice Initiative.
And I'm Erika Holmes, founder of EL Holmes Legal Solutions, a modern law practice focusing on family law and attorney ethics and regulation. And I am the inaugural chair of the CBA's MLPI.
Now, it's been a beat since we've had one of our episodes released. It's been a busy summer, and I know, Erika, you've gone through about 100 trials in the past week or two. So for those folks who need a little refresher, what is the modern law revolution all about?
So the revolution is coming up with a different way of practicing law, which offers alternative business models that provide a win-win for clients and lawyers. The Revolution podcast shows modern representation and action by featuring modern lawyers and community leaders, like we have wonderful ones today, to inspire and teach our listeners how to build a thriving law practice that offers innovative, client-driven, and cost-effective legal services for everyone. And as JP alluded to, today we will be focusing on revolutionizing your billing practices by having a very special guest. But I have to do a really quick disclosure that I realized the only reason I do this podcast is so that I get to talk to these awesome people. And I have just an excuse to pick your brain, Bob. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to do this.
Before we jump right into our interview with Bob, I just want to highlight this will be the first of a three-part series focused on billing. And so today our topic is the evils of the billable hour, the pitfalls of the billable hour. And in the upcoming weeks, after we lay the predicate, we're going to jump into alternate billing models. And finally, we're going to take a deep dive into unbundling. Like a lot of folks, I came into the practice of law thinking the billable hour was just something that always has been and always will be. And as you know, I started my legal career in Washington, D.C. at a big firm. And there was definitely the expectation there that, as a minimum, you bill 1,850 hours, but more likely you're billing over 2,000. So I was at about 2,250 a year. And what I found, I always prided myself on being an efficient, productive person. I never pulled all-nighters in college or law school. I was always working ahead, staying ahead of the game. But I found that efficiency that I had honed really wasn't valuable for a law firm setting. So if I drafted a brief in 6 hours, that might take another associate 10 hours. It's not as if we were judged by that same level of productivity. It was, great, JP, you have 4 extra hours to bill on another case now. So I constantly felt like I was on this treadmill working against my efficiency instead of having it rewarded. And I can't tell you how many cases I was pulled onto with the lead in, hey, JP, if you could use the hours, I could use your help on this case. And what it did is it myopically focused on the business side of the law rather than the practice of law. And for, in my day job as a millennial lawyer consultant, for a generation that truly believes in doing well by doing good and comes to the law for altruistic reasons, like all of us do across generations, if we take this focus solely on the business of law, the billable hours that we're going to achieve with this case, it actually depresses motivation in the long run. And that's certainly what happened to me and was one of the deciding factors for me to ultimately look at new careers.
So the billable hour almost drove you out of the practice of law.
Yes. Judging my life by 6-minute chunks. And, I started in DC, and when I moved back to my home city of Denver, I thought, okay, I'm going to get some reprieve from this. But what I found was the expectations were the same. The time was the same. DC is a city where you start later and end later. Denver, you start earlier and end earlier. But it was the same basic setup that I was pushing against. I'm reminded of Henry David Thoreau talked about the price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it, which is an old concept that I think younger lawyers especially are seizing the hold of. And when you focus so myopically on those 6-minute chunks, you're literally looking at little chunks of your life slipping by as you're working rather than focusing on, I'm helping this important client with an interesting case. And it's that perspective that I think permeates a lot of what we do. And I found in my research for this, I came across a pamphlet from the ABA in 1958 that kind of made me laugh, but it lamented the fact that doctors and dentists were much better at business than lawyers. And that if we could keep more meticulous time records and value our time, we could become just as good in business as those other professions. And so the ABA recommended that the average lawyer should bill 1,300 hours per year. So that's 5 to 6 hours per day, 48 weeks per year, which any law firm, if they looked at that today, would say we can't keep our doors open that way. And
you're
so
a part-time lawyer if you work 1,300 hours.
Right. Or you could be an efficient lawyer who is off the billable hour and could work 1,300 hours and build a profitable practice. But with the billable hour, it's morphed into something entirely different. And so you look at, Yale Law School, for example, calculated if you're billing 1,800 hours a year, that means you're actually going to be at work for about 2,400 hours. So those are 10-hour days for 50 weeks a year. And so just in this short period of time, with the introduction of the billable hour as approved by the ABA to the present day, it's completely morphed into this monster and this motivating factor that is, our reason to be as lawyers. And so I'm really excited today to talk to you, Erika, and to talk to Bob Glaves about how we have gotten onto that treadmill and how we can start getting off it as well. So that's my experience with the billable hour. Erika, I know that you're not a fan of it either.
Definitely not. And again, it was with you, it was realizing how indoctrinated I had gotten into that whole concept. And for me, it was, I had eaten dinner, now I was cleaning up the dishes and, hung up my towel. And I thought to myself, point 2. And I'm like, oh my God, I really am living my life like 6 minutes at a time. And no offense to Vin Diesel, but I'm just not cool enough to live like that, or a quarter mile or whatever. But so when I had it, working for the firm that I was at, and the billable hour being a big part of that, when I was starting my own firm, I went in search of, if there are alternatives. The one that 4 years ago that I kept running into was the sliding scale, which can be done as an alternative billing form. But the way that I was seeing it, it was just really bad for lawyers, because it was just like the same concept of the billable hour, but you're just working for less money. And bless the people that can do nonprofit work and the public interest lawyers. I mean, they're fantastic. We need them, but they're just better people than I am, because I need to make money. I mean, I like my stuff. I'm all about access to justice, but I want to have some stuff. And so finding an alternative billing method that was affordable for my clients, but at the same time was that I could make a living at and, have a profit at. And that's when I, continue to do my research. And now I offer only unbundled services, and it's all for a flat fee. It has been amazing for the lawyer side of things, because I get to, pick exactly the work that I want. And in terms of doing a flat fee, I get my fee up front. So I have a 99.9% collection rate, and for the clients, they get this dependable price. They know what they're paying for. That is my story when it comes to different ways of billing and my history. So let's turn over to our guest, Bob Glaves, who is the executive director of the Chicago Bar Foundation. And he's been in that role since October of 1999, before which he had a successful 9-year career as a civil litigator in the Chicago law firm, then known as, and I'm going to slaughter this so you can help me, Bob, Menges, Mikas, and just say it yourself, please.
You were on a roll there. Menges, Mikas, and Molzahn.
Okay, thank you. But as the executive director of the Chicago Bar Foundation, he's been responsible for leading and overseeing the foundation's work that brings Chicago's legal community together to improve access to justice for people and to make the legal system more fair and efficient for everyone. And since he's been the director, He's increased the amount of its annual grants and fundraising more than tenfold, and has played a lead role in launching a number of groundbreaking access to justice initiatives. And then in all his spare time, Bob authors the Bobservation blog that you need to check out for sure. Bob, let's hear from you. And just starting off with, so what opened your eyes to the evils of the billable hour?
Well, I have a very similar experience to you and JP in the sense that I started my career wedded to it as well, and serving mostly business and corporate clients too, in a larger firm and then in a boutique firm after that. Even then, the billable hour is just you realize it just doesn't, I think you both really talked about how it doesn't reward efficiency, it doesn't reward anything the client might be actually after. But I started to notice my clients were afraid to call me because they were going to be on the clock immediately. And then I also noticed if I didn't write down every one of those times the client called, I'd have worked 12 hours and I had 6 hours on my sheet, and then you're like on the other side of it, you're like, oh no, I know what I did today, but I can't like actually bill for it. And it just creates all these disincentives and crazy disincentives. And so for most of my time, I was in the firm that you mentioned earlier, Mangus, Micus, and Molzon, and we were small enough where we could experiment with some different billing arrangements.
So a larger firm actually let you experiment?
A smaller boutique firm did. In the larger firm, I don't know, we could have pulled it off, but I was able to do a few things contingent and doing some fixed fee work and other things. But the problem when you're doing it in a traditional firm that's built around the billable hour like that is they judge everything by the billable hour still. So like if you had a contingent case and it worked, all of a sudden it compares very favorably to the billable hour, right? And then the next one that doesn't work out as well, they compare it to the billable hour. Well, that didn't work so good. And anybody who operates regularly on the contingent fee builds all of that in, that you're averaging it out over a series of cases. So it was pretty hard to do in that climate. And not long out, as I was just starting to really wrestle with how was I going to be able to do this more, is when I decided to take the plunge to move over to the Chicago Bar Foundation. Initially thought I was going to do that for 2 or 3 years, and it's now been 20 plus. So I am now living a different life here, but that has never left me from that moment. And now that I've been at the CBF for a while, for almost 10 years now, we've been working on what we call the Justice Entrepreneurs Project, which is an incubator to help lawyers get practices off the ground that are more innovative and are serving the middle class, and small businesses that are very underserved in our current billable hour mostly based market. And so was able to bring back some of that experience and then a lot more learning from lawyers like Erika, who are doing that kind of work for the consumer and small business markets now and making it work. So that's been in a roundabout way my experience there.
Well, and with the incubator, you don't even allow them to do the billable hour, right? As you're teaching these wonderful young attorneys how to do things differently.
Right. Yeah. It's out of the gate expected you're not going to use it. You can use different kinds of alternative fee arrangements, but it's definitely out of the gate one of the expectations. And how we got there, I mean, we're going to talk more about, the many evils of the billable hour, but how we got there, particularly around this program being at such a fundamental element, is when you're talking about people who are middle class, well into the middle class really, or small businesses, they are working on budgets, like most of us. They live on budgets. And when you tell them they are going to get something and you can't tell them what it's going to cost, or sometimes you're telling them you're going to have to put a whole bunch of money up front, I'm still not going to tell you what it's going to cost. That doesn't work very well for somebody who's working on a budget. It's just not something they're going to do unless they absolutely have to. And what we're seeing in the legal market is a lot more people going to court on their own, a lot more people avoiding lawyers altogether, because they aren't, other than like criminal defense things and things where they really know they have to do it, a lot of people are just avoiding lawyers when they don't see alternatives that they can judge in a way they judge other things in their lives. How much is it going to cost and what do I get for it? And so that is fundamentally the problem, that probably the biggest problem in the market, and is so tied to the billable hour. It became one of the fundamental principles our incubator is built on and the network of lawyers uses.
It sounds so simple when you phrase it that way, that, how much is it going to cost is an answer that is so difficult for so many of us in this profession. And it seems so elemental, but we've become so fixated on the billable hour that it's, we quote the hourly cost and it's off to the races from there. And so I love the work that you're doing and that Entrepreneurs for Justice are doing to really, let young lawyers know there's a different way to move forward. And, I practiced law at a big firm, a small firm, a mid-sized firm. And I figured I tried every style of law and this is just the way it is. But, I love the work that you all are doing to, open a lot of lawyers' eyes and a lot of clients' eyes that know there is another way to practice law that makes a lot more sense. And
we are seeing people succeed with it as Erika is and others who have taken the plunge. But, there's such a herd mentality in our profession. And we are so hidebound, that, we're still using words from 400 years ago that came over from Old England and, and terminology, all throughout the law that is just so much is based on precedent. And so I too had the same opinion when I started practicing in the early 90s that this is just the way it is. This is what everybody does. They bill by the hour. And not realizing that really was only at that point about 20 years, really much part of our practice, the regular way people did things. When you go back further than that, the profession was not using the billable hour so much. And you didn't, we can't prove this in any perfectly research tested way, but when you go back to the before the 70s, when the billable hour was not the prevalent way of business in the profession, you saw a lot more solo small firm lawyers who could build successful lives. And Erika, they could have stuff, and they weren't necessarily getting rich, but they made a very comfortable living, and they were in small towns, big cities, wherever. And your everyday people, your everyday small business could afford them. And there was a better functioning market. And we didn't see floods of people coming to court on their own for bread and butter cases. And we didn't see these statistics like this. And our theory is it coincides pretty closely with the billable hour. Again, there is, to do this in a truly research tested way, you would have had to been tracking everybody all the way through. But that is when the market really started to go south for your everyday person and your regular practitioners trying to serve them. Because we've just effectively priced the quote unquote regular guy, and I don't mean guy in the literal sense there. I mean, your regular person has been priced out of the market. We did it. We did it as a profession. Whoever sent that memo out, we all got it without realizing we got it, right? We just started doing it. And to break that cycle, it happens one person at a time, one program at a time, one firm at a time. And we're thrilled what you're doing in Colorado to really bring these concepts to a larger audience and get people thinking differently, because it's better for everybody if we can make the market work where lawyers are serving clients and can get paid a reasonable, fair price for that and give them good services that they need.
Well, so you've alluded to the uncertainty in price with the billable hour. What would you list as maybe the top 2 or 3 other major flaws in charging by the hour?
Yeah, uncertainty is a big one, but I think maybe even before that one is, what are they actually coming to you as a lawyer for? They're coming to you because they want a problem solved. They're trying to manage a risk. They have a question that's burning inside them that, if they're trying to start a business or something that they're not sure about and it's sort of paralyzing them, whatever it is, they're coming to you with an issue that they want you to help them resolve. So what we're selling them is a solution to that, right? But what are we selling them? We're selling them time. And so if the solution takes 5 minutes or it takes 5 years, that might affect the price you want to charge them. But the value to them is the same if you're giving them the solution. That's what they're looking for. So we're selling them something completely differently than what they're coming to us for. And so I have a friend, this to prove that I'm old, because I mentioned I started practicing in the early 90s. The story I use a lot, one of my good friends, he was in a big firm at that time too. And we were litigators. And we used to get, the deposition transcripts literally in transcribed form in big packets, and we'd review them and mark them up after we got them and get ready for trials, and figure out, where you're going to impeach witnesses by marking pages and things like that. And at some point in the early 90s, they started coming with a floppy disk in the back, a back envelope. And I remember when these started to show up, we weren't all that tech savvy back then. I would usually look at it and not realize what it was for, usually throw it in the garbage or something and do things the way I normally did it, right? And so he's a very smart guy, but he was doing IP law. And so he had a big patent case where he had a stack of 10 really long depositions that a partner brought into his office and said, I need you to go through all these depositions here and find out everywhere they said the word X. And I can't remember the word that it was, but it was very relevant because it was an IP case, And this was going to take a really long time to go through all those deposition transcripts. And my friend Dave, he said, did you notice if it came with a floppy disk? And he goes, a what? So similar to my reaction, right? And so the partner looks and goes, yeah, there's one in there. And he goes, well, I could get you that answer in like 5 minutes. And the partner kind of like went silent for a minute, and he said, well, if you get that answer in 5 minutes, my partners are going to kill me. It was, because that on the billable hour model, you just took something that was going to take about 50 hours and turned it into 5 minutes. But I tell that story because the value to the client didn't change one iota. In fact, it was probably more accurate with the floppy disk than somebody who's well into the 7th transcript who might miss the word when they're looking for it, right? So not only, and it was faster too, which is another thing the client usually likes, So if you're talking about how time's relevant to the client and what they come to you with, almost always they prefer to have something done faster. They value it being resolved more quickly. So the billable hour just kills you in those situations. So I can use another example from my own practice where I happened to be representing an individual pro bono, but it had the potential to turn into a paying class action case because it was such a scam with this credit card company. And had I been practicing, I probably would have charged this differently. But let's say I was doing it on the billable hour. This guy had a problem. He was stuck with a credit card agreement he didn't agree to and a deposit that they were keeping of his. And this clearly was a pattern that the company was using. And I wrote a great letter for him, a demand letter, give him his money back, you rescind this right now or you're going to get sued. And they did. They actually listened, right? So I wrote this great letter in half an hour, and sometimes you could do this on the phone even for less time, that resolved his case, got him his money back, and they were going to leave him alone forever. His credit record was clean. That was an amazing result for that guy. Now, if I was billing by the hour, I would have had half an hour of billable time there. Now, that is just so backwards for the lawyer and the client, right? But those are some of my favorite examples from my life before this.
Well, no, and to me, is what really struck me with the billable hour is that it immediately puts you in conflict with your own client because they want you to go as fast as possible, so they pay as little as possible, and you want to go as slow as possible so that you make as much money as possible. And so how is that starting off a relationship when you're supposed to be trust and it's supposed to be about the law? You're just immediately in inherent conflict.
And I think even when there's, not the kind of the example that you gave, Bob, of, why are we going to search the floppy disks when we can do it with a highlighter and paper? Even when there's not that kind of calculus, there's also, I think, kind of a willful blindness of, let's not search for better ways to do things as time goes on. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's stick with this system because it is giving us the hours. But I think, as you point out, there's that disconnect between, the value and what the client is actually seeking in the first place. And a question I have for you, kind of taking a step back, you had joked that, everyone kind of got the memo at the same time in the 1970s for moving to the billable hour. But what, in your estimation, really pushed that forward as the way lawyers decide to value their own work? What was the impetus to make the billable hour so prevalent throughout law firms?
Yeah, how it happened that quickly is sort of amazing. But there was an antitrust case brought. So I guess for your typical bread and butter practice, the bar associations, and I assume they did this in Colorado, apparently we did in Chicago, had rate scales of what you would charge for different kinds of matters, and lawyers all charged them And this is how the airlines used to operate once upon a time too. And it's funny that lawyers were price fixing, but that's kind of what that was. And that we got called on it, but apparently we did. Somebody sued, and they said that's antitrust to be dictating the price you're going to charge for the services. So that was correct. The correct decision. Obviously, you shouldn't be like saying everybody has to get X price. However, the idea that it all had to shift to the billable hour was like a complete overreaction, right? I mean, you could have charged different flat fees, different subscription fees, because not everything is amenable. I think in your next episode, you'll get into different arrangements. I mean, some things that are going to go on for a while, it might be hard to give a good fixed fee estimate right up front that's going to work for everybody, but you could do it on a monthly basis, perhaps,
Well, so clients obviously, or it's obvious why clients would dislike the billable hour for exactly, the reasons that you were saying. And I mean, when most lawyers, you talk to them, do they love working by the billable hour? No, they really don't either. But why are we not switching? What are the biggest barriers with nobody being really happy? Like, why are we not switching to something different?
Yeah, well, the herd mentality that you two have described well, and I think we've all talked about here, is a big factor, right? You're running against the crowd still to try to do that, and in a conservative precedent-based profession, that's hard to do. But so that's one of the problems. But I think it's also just no one ever taught this in law school, and we don't typically get taught anything differently. Certainly not in firms that are based on it. They're not teaching you how to do alternative arrangements or why those might be attractive to clients. You all are doing it through this initiative, which is great. We're starting to do it more through the JEP here and through our bar to try to just expose people to there is a different way. There is another way you can do this. And Erika, you pointed out some of the reasons why it's really a good thing for the lawyers too, and JP as well. You know what you're getting. You sort of have much more control over your own life when you're using these other arrangements to bill as opposed to the billable hour. But the other thing that I think we have to get over is there's this mentality that if I can't figure out how long something's going to take, for sure, I can't give you a price. And so, like, again, as a former litigator, I hear that a lot in litigation. Well, we can't possibly tell you what that's going to cost. And you might not be able to, but you know what? If you know what you're doing and you know what kind of case it is, you can probably estimate what generally is going to go into it and think about some different ways you might price it. And again, you'll talk about that more in the next time. But some of it is just really getting past that idea that like something took you longer, automatically you lost. If you're doing something that consistently takes you longer every single time, well, fine. Okay. Then maybe that's not maybe you don't have that right. But the idea that anytime something takes longer than you thought it was going to, the risk falls on the client and never on you is just it doesn't make any sense. And again, it's not going to work. We're already starting to lose to technology-based solutions that aren't as good for people a lot of times just because they have fixed prices and people know what they're getting. And, you're just going to lose out every time without getting past that mentality and really thinking about, if you really average it out. And I will tell one more story from experience that you both may have seen this too, but in the early part of I was doing mostly commercial litigation towards the end, but I was doing tort litigation at the beginning. So the lawyers on the other side often were contingent fee lawyers. So it'd be personal injury, product liability, cases like that. And I was looking at we'd be in a lot of different firms for depositions and things like that, trials. And the bigger personal injury firms in Chicago that we'd be up against, just one day I was kind of looking at how they're structured. And we both, the firm I was in and them had about the same number of people. But the ratio of lawyers to other people in the firm was completely upside down. So we had almost all lawyers and then a few paralegals and some other administrative support. They had very few lawyers, lots of paralegals, lots of other experts that they'd brought in because they were billing contingent fee. They only had an incentive to use lawyers for anything lawyers really needed to do. They had every incentive to use these other professionals and other people to do the other things that they could do. Where we, billing by the hour, had every incentive to use lawyers for anything we possibly could use lawyers for. And you look at, we were working on the same exact cases. So, it's a roundabout way to get back to your question. Is like, we think, oh yeah, there's no way we could predict this, or there's no way we could do this. Well, yes, there is. I mean, I think if you do litigation for long enough, you're going to start to figure out what goes into these cases. And some are going to take you longer and some are going to take not as long. And that's okay, right? As long as you're pricing it in a way that's going to measure, balance out over time.
And I think the key with all of this is, we're selling ourselves and our clients short when we assume there's no way we can offer the certainty that our client's coming to us. It's an uncertain time for our clients and they need our help, whether it's with a business matter, whether it's with litigation, whether it's a family matter. And, to the extent that we can offer them certainty, all the better. And Bob, you had mentioned with, all these different legal proxy services. I mean, in the state of California, a quarter of all new corporation Secretary of State filings are done through LegalZoom. And so just huge swaths of business have decided we're not even going to look at a lawyer because I know I can go to LegalZoom.com and it'll cost me X dollars and I know what I'm getting myself into. And it's a system, I think, that very eloquently you've described that doesn't serve lawyers or clients well. It doesn't provide that value.
Yeah, it gets them the immediate result, but a good lawyer advising a startup business is talking them through like the form of your business. Is this the right form of your business? What other things that go into it? The form that the lawyer prepares is like the least of the value that the lawyer's giving. It's a critical outcome of it, right? But if you're selling forms, you're in it's a losing proposition to begin with, right? You're selling the advice you're giving this startup business about how to structure, how to protect, manage risk, not avoid risk. You can't avoid risk in life, manage risks. And what kind of things they should be thinking about as they start to stage up. And even LegalZoom has figured out they're selling legal insurance plans on the back end where people often do want to talk to a lawyer after they've used that service now. And they can buy these legal insurance plans to do that. But boy, if you were a lawyer serving that market and you just charge the way they're charging up front to compete with that, doesn't have to be the exact same price, but if you just did some of the same things, you'd be a lot more competitive in that market and a lot more valuable to the client, to your point, JP.
For sure. Well, Bob, we could monopolize your whole afternoon talking to you about the billable hour, but I want to let you go. It's a Friday afternoon here. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and giving a lot of us a lot of good details to focus on as we look at the billable hour closely and start looking at how do we shift away from it. So thank you so much, Bob.
Thanks. Enjoyed being with you. Thanks again.
So that does our episode on the evils of the billable hour. Again, there is hope around the corner. Our next episode is going to take a dive into alternate billing arrangements. And then our third episode in this series, again, will look closely at the wonderful world of unbundling. Erika, before we sign off, we have very exciting news with a Revolution hotline. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, we are thrilled to announce the launching of the How to Start a Revolution Helpline. So if you have any questions for Bob or other presenters that you've heard us talk to up to this point, or there's topics that you'd like to have covered in the podcast, just call the Revolution Hotline and leave us a message. We will actually play your question on the next podcast, and we will provide an answer. So make sure to leave your name and the name of your firm or organization so that everyone knows who their fellow revolutionaries are. And the phone number is 303-824-5399. That's 303-824-5399. And that will also be posted on the NLPI community page. So those of you driving right now can get it later. And so welcome to the revolution. You've got questions and we've got answers.
Looking forward to hearing from you all, and thank you for joining us on the revolution today.